A Russian logistics convoy was moving along the M14 highway south of Melitopol, heading toward Crimea with the cargo that keeps an army alive. Fuel tankers, ammunition trucks, armored escorts, supply vehicles. On paper, it looked like a normal rear area movement, far from the most violent fighting. But in Ukraine, a road behind the front line can become a trap the moment drones are watching from above. According to battlefield accounts, Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs had been tracking the convoy before the first strike came. They were not only waiting for a target, they were waiting for the right place. That is what makes this attack so dangerous for Russia. Ukraine did not need to burn every vehicle on the road. It only needed to stop the convoy in a narrow section, block the front, lock the rear, and let fuel, ammunition, smoke, and confusion do the rest. A supply column does not need to be destroyed completely to fail. It only needs to stop at the wrong place at the wrong time. Before we go deeper, subscribe to Military Force, because this ambush may reveal how Ukraine is turning Russian logistics into one of the most vulnerable targets of the war. The Russian convoy on the M14 was not only a line of vehicles. It was a moving part of the supply system that links occupied southern Ukraine with Crimea. According to battlefield accounts, the convoy was moving south of Melitopol, and its direction mattered as much as its cargo. It was not driving into a direct tank battle or an infantry assault. It was traveling along a rear route, carrying the basic materials that allow Russian units to keep pressure on the front. There were cargo trucks, fuel tankers, armored escorts, and ammunition vehicles. Each one served a different role, but together they formed one military lifeline. For Russia, this kind of convoy is not a small support detail. It is the bloodstream of the operation. Fuel keeps tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery tractors, and air defense systems moving. Ammunition keeps guns firing and lets Russian units maintain the heavy fire they often use to grind down Ukrainian positions. Recovery vehicles help damaged equipment return to service. Engineering assets keep roads open, remove obstacles, and repair movement routes when the battlefield changes. If one part of that chain is cut, the effect can move forward very quickly. That is why the M14 matters. A road like this is not just asphalt on a map. It is part of the land corridor that helps Russia connect occupied areas in the south with Crimea, a base Moscow has used for storage, command, air defense, naval support, and movement toward the southern front. When supplies travel through this corridor, they are not only serving one unit, they may be feeding several positions across a wider military zone. The most important detail is that the battle did not begin when the FPV drones launched. It began earlier, when Ukrainian reconnaissance drones started watching the convoy. That means the first weapon was not an explosive charge. It was information. Ukrainian operators could study direction, speed, spacing, escorts, and possible escape routes before choosing when to strike. In modern war, seeing the target early can be as important as hitting it later. This also explains why Ukraine's broader drone campaign is so dangerous for Russian logistics. Recent reporting says Ukrainian mid-range drones are striking the 25 to 200 kilometer zone behind Russian lines, hitting fuel, ammunition, troop transport routes, and supply roads that once felt harder to reach. Other reports describe attacks along routes tied to Russia's land corridor to Crimea, where fuel convoys, ammunition trucks, rail hubs, and supply columns have come under growing pressure. So the M14 convoy should not be viewed as an isolated road ambush. It fits a larger pattern. Ukraine is trying to make Russian rear areas less predictable, less safe, and more expensive to use. Instead of only hunting tanks at the front, Kyiv is working to weaken the system that keeps those tanks supplied. A destroyed tank is visible, but a delayed fuel truck can quietly reduce the strength of an entire unit. This is the real danger for Moscow. If every supply movement needs more escorts, more electronic warfare cover, more route changes, and more time, then Russian firepower becomes harder to sustain. The convoy on the M14 was valuable because it was carrying what the front needed most. But that value also made it vulnerable, because once Ukraine understood the route, the cargo, and the timing, the road itself could become part of the trap. And that is where the next part of this story begins. Ukraine did not need to attack everywhere at once. It only needed to choose the place where movement would become impossible. Ukraine did not choose the easiest target first. It chose the place where the convoy would have the hardest time escaping. That detail matters because a logistics convoy is strongest when it keeps moving. Even if one truck is damaged, the rest of the column may still push forward, spread out, or turn off the road. But when movement is taken away, the convoy begins to lose its own shape. It becomes slower, tighter, and more exposed. That is why the timing of the ambush was more important than the number of drones in the air. According to battlefield accounts, Ukrainian drones did not attack as soon as they saw the Russian vehicles. They watched. They waited. They followed the convoy as it moved farther along the M14, south of Melitopol, toward a section where the road offered fewer choices. Open fields sat on both sides, tree lines gave little protection, and the exits were limited. In that kind of space, a long column cannot easily scatter. It must either keep moving forward or become trapped behind itself. This is where Ukraine's plan became clear. The first strikes were not aimed at the most explosive cargo. They were aimed at movement. FPV drones hit near the front of the column and near the rear, creating a block from both ends. In a few seconds, the road changed from a supply route into a closed corridor. The convoy was still full of vehicles, but its freedom to move had been cut down. That is the difference between destroying vehicles and disabling a mission. If Ukraine had only hit several trucks in the middle, the damage might have looked impressive on video, but part of the convoy could still continue. The front could accelerate. The rear could slow down. Escorts could move out and create distance. But when the head is stopped and the tail is locked, every vehicle between them becomes part of the same problem. The effect would have spread fast. Drivers at the front could not simply push ahead. Vehicles behind them had nowhere to go. Trucks at the rear could not reverse with confidence, because the road behind was no longer open. Armored escorts had less room to turn their weapons, change position, or move into better cover. Recovery teams could not reach the right vehicle at the right time. A convoy built for movement was forced into stillness. And in modern war, stillness is deadly. A stopped vehicle gives drone operators more time to identify it. A crowded road makes each mistake more costly. A narrow formation creates a chain of risk because one disabled truck can block another, and one confused driver can slow several more behind him. The danger no longer comes only from the first strike. It comes from the pressure that follows. This is why the narrow section of the M14 was so important. Ukraine did not need to control the whole highway. It only needed to control one piece of it for long enough to break the convoy's rhythm. Once the formation was compressed, even small damage could create a larger military effect. The road itself became a weapon because it forced the Russian vehicles into a space where speed, mass, and armor offered less protection. For Russia, this was a serious tactical problem. The convoy still had vehicles, escorts, and supplies, but the mission was already in danger. A logistics column that cannot move cannot deliver. A supply route that becomes blocked is no longer a safe rear line. And once that happens, the burden shifts from transport to survival. But Russian forces were not helpless, and their reaction showed how quickly a road ambush can turn into a fight over control, signals, engineering, and time. Russia did not sit still inside the ambush, and its reaction showed that this convoy was protected by more than trucks and rifles. Once the column was blocked on the M14, the Russian side faced a clear problem. Firing back was not enough. A stopped convoy needed movement more than anything else because every minute on that road gave Ukrainian drone teams more time to choose targets. So the Russian response began to take shape in several layers: eyes in the air, electronic pressure, armored cover, and engineering work on the ground. The first layer was observation. Battlefield accounts describe Orlan 10 reconnaissance drones appearing above the area. That matters because the Orlan 10 is one of Russia's most common battlefield UAVs, and its job is to search, spot, and help direct fire. In this situation, it was not only looking for Ukrainian operators, it was trying to rebuild Russia's picture of the battlefield after the convoy lost control of the road. The second layer was electronic warfare. The source describes a vehicle with a different silhouette and antenna layout, which raised concern among Ukrainian operators. If it was an electronic warfare system, it could threaten the control link or video feed of FPV drones. That kind of threat can change the whole fight. A drone does not need to be shot down to fail. It can lose signal, lose image, or miss the target at the worst possible moment. This made the battle more dangerous for Ukraine. FPV drones are powerful, but they depend on control, timing, and a clear view. If the signal becomes unstable, the operator has less time to adjust. If the video feed cuts out near the target, even a good approach can turn into a failed strike. That pressure forced Ukrainian teams to decide quickly which Russian asset mattered most. The third layer was engineering. The source describes an IMR-2 engineering vehicle moving away from the blocked column and trying to open a path through the fields west of the highway. This was not a small detail. At that moment, the IMR-2 may have been one of the most important vehicles in the convoy. It was not carrying the most explosive cargo, but it was carrying a possible escape route. That is why the Russian move made sense. If the road was blocked, then survival depended on creating a new road. If the IMR-2 could clear enough space across the field, some vehicles might leave the M14 and avoid the trap. Even a narrow opening could matter, because a few trucks escaping with fuel or ammunition could reduce the scale of the loss. The convoy did not need to recover perfectly. It only needed to regain movement. The fourth layer was armored protection. BTR-82A vehicles reportedly moved to cover the engineers, using their 30mm cannons against the approaching drones. This turned the ambush into a fight between small flying weapons and armored escorts trying to defend the one asset that could change the outcome. The BTRs were not just guarding cargo, they were protecting time. For Ukraine, this created a hard choice. There were not enough drones to destroy every vehicle, and Russian artillery was beginning to respond. The operators had to decide whether to chase visible targets, attack the escorts, or stop the engineers from opening the escape path. Each choice carried risk, because the wrong target could give the convoy the few minutes it needed. This is what made the Russian reaction important. It proved the convoy was still fighting for control, not only trying to survive, but it also revealed the weakness of being trapped in a narrow corridor. Once movement depends on a few key vehicles, those vehicles become more valuable than the cargo itself. And when Ukraine understood that, the attack began to shift from destroying what was stuck on the road to stopping the machines that could set it free. When Russia tried to open an escape route, Ukraine shifted its focus from the trapped convoy to the vehicles trying to restore movement. That was the key tactical choice. Ukrainian FPV drones did not simply rush toward the most dramatic targets on the road. They had a clearer problem to solve. The convoy was stuck, but it was not finished. If Russian engineers could open a path through the field, part of the column might leave the M14 and the ambush could lose its force. So Ukraine had to attack the rescue effort before it became a real exit. According to battlefield accounts, the IMR-2 engineering vehicle moved away from the highway and began working toward an opening west of the road. BTR-82A armored vehicles moved with it, giving cover and firing their 30mm cannons at incoming drones. This was dangerous for both sides. Russia had lost control of the main route, but it still had tools to recover. Ukraine had trapped the convoy, but it had to keep that trap closed. This is where the battle became less about firepower and more about priorities. A single truck may carry important supplies, but it cannot free an entire column. An engineering vehicle can. If the IMR-2 cleared enough ground, it could turn a blocked highway into a temporary escape lane. Even a narrow path could allow several vehicles to move away and reduce the damage. For that reason, the engineer was not just another target. It was the machine trying to change the outcome. The BTR-82. A escorts also became more important than their size suggested. Their job was not only to survive the drone attack. They had to buy time for the engineers. Every burst from a 30mm cannon could force FPV operators to adjust, delay, or miss. Every second of protection could help the escape route grow wider. Ukraine's answer was to slow the process instead of chasing every vehicle. That choice shows a deeper understanding of logistics warfare. If Ukrainian operators hit another random truck, they could add more damage, but the Russian column might still find a way out. If they stopped the IMR-2 or forced the BTRs to focus on self-defense, the opening would remain too small, too risky, and too slow to save the convoy. This kind of targeting is not about destroying the largest number of vehicles in the fastest way. It is about striking the part of the system that is solving the enemy's problem. At that moment, Russia's problem was not a lack of trucks, it was a lack of movement. The vehicle that could restore movement became the most valuable target on the battlefield. The pressure also spread along the highway. As the engineers slowed down, the vehicles stayed packed together. Drivers had less space to react. Commanders had less control. Escorts had to divide attention between drones, fields, and the blocked road. The longer this lasted, the more the convoy became a crowded system under stress, not a clean formation with a clear mission. That is why Ukraine did not need a perfect strike on every Russian vehicle. It needed to protect the condition that made the ambush work. Keep the road blocked. Keep the escape route unfinished. Keep the convoy inside the danger zone long enough for the situation to worsen. And once that delay held, the battle moved into its most destructive stage, because a trapped supply convoy does not stay quiet for long when dangerous cargo is sitting in the same narrow corridor. When the fuel tanker and the ammunition truck were hit, the ambush changed from a drone attack into a logistics collapse on the road. At first, the convoy still had a chance to recover. The escape route was not fully open, but Russian engineers were working. Armored escorts were still active. Some drivers may have believed the worst moment had already passed. Then a Ukrainian FPV drone struck a fuel tanker, and the situation changed in seconds. A fuel truck is not just another vehicle in a column. It carries movement. Without fuel, tanks, armored vehicles, artillery tractors, and support trucks slowly lose their value. But when a tanker burns inside a blocked convoy, it becomes more dangerous than its cargo role. It creates heat, panic, smoke, and a physical wall that other vehicles cannot easily cross. According to battlefield accounts, black smoke began rising over the M14 after the tanker was hit. That smoke worked like a second weapon. Russian drivers lost visibility. Crews farther back could not clearly see what was happening ahead. Some vehicles tried to move, but the road no longer gave them a clean direction. A column that had already been compressed now became harder to command. But the smoke also created a problem for Ukraine. Drone operators could no longer see the entire convoy clearly. Some screens showed only black clouds. Other feeds caught short flashes of movement before losing the target again. In that moment, Ukraine had to make a choice under uncertainty. Chase the vehicles that appeared to be moving, or strike deeper into the smoke where the ammunition trucks were believed to be. That decision became the turning point. A visible truck is easier to attack, but one destroyed vehicle may not stop a convoy. An ammunition truck hidden inside a blocked formation can change the whole battlefield. If it explodes, the damage does not stay in one place. It throws fragments, spreads fire, blocks movement, and forces nearby crews to abandon vehicles that might still be working. The source describes a first explosion that looked smaller than expected. For a brief moment, it may have seemed like Ukraine had missed the decisive target. Then a larger blast followed deeper inside the convoy. Ammunition began cooking off, and the road became more than blocked. It became unsafe to use. That is when the convoy started working against itself. Burning vehicles blocked recovery teams. Recovery vehicles blocked supply trucks. Drivers could not reverse because other vehicles were behind them. Crews could not move forward because fire and wreckage were ahead. The same formation that once gave Russia transport capacity now turned into a chain of trapped machines. This is the real meaning of a logistics defeat. Ukraine did not need to destroy every truck on the M14. It needed to break the mission. If fuel does not arrive, artillery fires less. If ammunition is lost, frontline pressure weakens. If recovery vehicles cannot reach damaged equipment, losses last longer. If engineers fail to open a route, delay becomes a battlefield result. That is why this strike matters beyond the vehicles seen burning on the road. It shows how modern drone warfare can attack the enemy's system, not only its armor. A convoy can look powerful when it moves, but once it is trapped with fuel, ammunition, and support vehicles in the same narrow space, its own cargo can become the force that destroys its mission. And that is the final lesson of the M14 ambush. The road did not have to disappear for Russia's supply movement to fail. It only had to become too dangerous, too crowded, and too broken to keep the war machine moving. The M14 ambush shows a hard lesson for Russia. In modern war, logistics can fail before supplies ever reach the front. If the battlefield accounts are accurate, Ukraine did not win this fight by using overwhelming firepower. It won by reading the road, waiting for the right moment, and striking the part of the convoy that mattered most. The drones were important, but the deeper weapon was timing. Russia tried to respond with reconnaissance, electronic warfare, armored escorts, and engineering vehicles. But once the convoy was held in a narrow space, every delay became more dangerous. Fuel, ammunition, recovery trucks, and escape routes all became part of the same problem. This is why the strike matters beyond one highway. Ukraine is showing that Russian strength at the front depends on movement behind it. If supply routes become slower, riskier, and harder to protect, then artillery fire, armored attacks, and troop movement all become weaker over time. Tell us what you think. Was this a drone victory or a logistics victory? Subscribe to Military Force for more battlefield analysis like this.